When I walked away from the intense, high-stakes environment of corporate investigations to open my own detective agency, I imagined a quieter, simpler life. I thought I'd left trouble behind, but it clung to me like a shadow. Meg, my wife, seemed all in at first. She was excited about the prospect of a more stable life, maybe hoping I'd have more time for us. But as my cases grew trickier, our worlds began to collide in ways I hadn't expected. One evening, after a particularly grueling case, I came home to find Meg distant and cold. Our conversations were short, and the silences between us felt uncomfortable, even tense. No matter what I tried, I couldn't seem to bridge the gap. Ironically, my skills as a detective only seemed to make things worse. And then Ellie brought her in, this new client who practically had trouble written all over her. The chaos was almost palpable the second she stepped into my office. "Hello, Mr. Lawson," she asked, a bit on edge. I could tell she was married. Most of my clients were. I gave her a nod. "Jack Lawson, ma'am. Not the singer, although I still get his mail sometimes. My dad actually named me after a spy from some old Jove publishing novels. Just Jack, not Luke," I joked. "Anyway, what can I help you with?" "Your assistant said you'd be able to help me. A friend referred me," she replied, flashing a nervous smile. "I see. And you are?" I asked, glancing her over, trying to gauge what this was all about. "Mrs. Laura Kramer," she said. "My husband Brian is a psychologist, and well, I think he's cheating on me. I need proof before I file for divorce." She passed me a photo of him, and I studied it, noting his age, early 40s with a strong jaw, dark hair going gray at the edges, and those sharp green eyes that could charm anyone. "All right, Mrs. Kramer, let me walk you through this. You're aware of how it all works?" I asked, watching her nod. "Give me 2 weeks, and I'll gather what you need. My standard fee is $5,000 for that time frame. That all right with you?" "Yes, half up front, right?" she confirmed, already reaching for her checkbook. "Exactly. Do you have an account he can't get into?" I asked, hoping she'd thought this through. "I opened a new one a few months ago," she answered, passing me a $2,500 cashier's check. "My friend said you're the best." "Thank you. Now, tell me everything that's made you suspicious. The more I know, the better I can help." "Well, he's always with me in the evenings and on weekends. But sometimes if I call his office during lunch, his phone is off," she explained. "He could be with a client," I offered, watching her reaction. "Normally, yes. But he's been so distant. He used to be affectionate, but now he barely even touches me. And I smelled perfume on his clothes. Not my brand," she said firmly. "Could have been a hug from a client," I suggested. "How old is he again?" 44, she answered, her eyes hardening. "You don't think I'm some idiot, do you?" "Not at all, ma'am. I just need to understand what's making you feel this way. Perfume's certainly suspicious, but it might be nothing. What else has you worried?" "On Mondays and Wednesdays, he always calls before lunch," she continued. "But sometimes it goes straight to voicemail." "All right, I'll start digging tomorrow, Wednesday, and keep you updated," I assured her as she stood up, her face softening just a little. "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. I just need peace of mind," she said with a small smile. "Anytime, Mrs. Kramer. If I don't find anything, you won't owe the rest of my fee. That's my guarantee." "Thank you, Mr. Lawson. Call me Jack." "Mr. Lawson was my father," I joked, making her chuckle. "All right, Jack. And please call me Laura." "Ma'am makes me feel old," she said. "All right, Laura. I'll be in touch soon. Ellie here has all your contact info." I watched her head out, then turned to Ellie as she took a seat across from me. Elena Torres, Ellie, had been my assistant for 6 years, and I'd be lost without her. She's got long, black hair, deep brown eyes, and a warm tan that hints at her Mexican heritage. She's been compared to J. Lo, though she's Kavya, and honestly, I think more striking. "All right, Jeef, here's what I've pulled together so far," she said, handing me a dossier. "Ellie's more than just my assistant. She's practically my partner, and I'm proud to say I trained her well." "Brian Kramer, psychologist," I murmured, flipping through the file. Something didn't sit right. There was a note about a malpractice suit filed by a former patient that had mysteriously been withdrawn, and not long after, her husband had divorced her. "This feels off, Ellie. Dig a little deeper on this guy, will you?" She nodded, smirking. Yeah, he gives me a weird vibe too, she said before leaving with a laugh. Ellie's more than an employee. She's invaluable. I pay her well, but she deserves even more. We operate like partners, splitting the work 60/40ths. Together, we bring in over $200,000 a year, with my share around $150,000 and hers a well-earned $110,000 after taxes and expenses. We even share an attorney, David Monroe, who's our go-to for legal help, specializing in divorce and domestic cases. Then, of course, there's my wife, Megan, formerly Megan Pierce. Meg and I met about 7 years ago, shortly after I left my old job in Langley, Virginia, and returned to Los Angeles. I'd been an insurance investigator, but after a rough case in Paris, I decided to start my own detective agency. Meg was a knockout, 5'8", and we clicked at a party thrown by my first client. She was the daughter of a friend of his, and within a year, we were married in a small, intimate ceremony. I spent 3 years in the Army as an interrogator before being recruited by an insurance company to investigate fraud. I did well, but eventually decided to go independent. Carrying my dad's old Colt 1911, a classic .45 ACP, feels second nature now. It's reliable like me. As I returned to check in with Ellie, who was deep in her research on Brian Kramer, I glanced at the clock. All right, Ellie, once you've gathered everything, call it a day. I'm heading home, I said with a smile. No problem, jefe. She looked up, flashing me a smile that carried more than just professional respect. I hope Meg knows what she's got in you, she said warmly. I chuckled. I think she does. Someday, you'll make someone a very lucky guy if you ever decide to settle down, I replied, flirting just a bit. She shrugged, a touch of regret flashing across her face. Missed that chance a few months ago, Jeef, she said softly, her eyes going back to the screen. I wanted to ask more, but held back. All right, wrap up and leave it in the folder for me. I'll pick it up in the morning. Good night, I said, stepping out of the office. Good night, boss. Ellie called back, her voice fading as I walked toward my car. As I headed home, my thoughts returned to Meg and how oddly she'd been acting lately. There was something simmering under the surface, but every time I asked, she brushed me off with the usual nothing. Why do they say nothing when it's obviously something? Men can't read minds. I'd seen this pattern before. Emotional distance usually comes with an affair, either right before or after it begins. With that uneasy thought, I turned onto our street and immediately noticed a Jeep Grand Cherokee Laredo parked outside our house. Just as I pulled into the driveway, my phone buzzed with Meg's name on the screen. Hey, babe. I answered, try to sound casual. Jack, when are you coming home? She asked, her tone strange and almost urgent. What do you mean? Who's we? I asked, already suspecting that the driver of that Jeep was involved. Just get here soon, okay? All right, I love you, I replied, though the words felt hollow. Okay, bye. A chill ran through me. Something was definitely wrong. I steadied my breathing, double-checked that my pocket voice recorder was on and my phone camera was ready, then took a quick shot of the Jeep's license plate before heading inside. With each step, my gut tightened, sensing something I wasn't ready to see. As soon as I opened the door, I saw them. Meg and the man, wrapped up in each other, hadn't even noticed me. Calmly, I lifted my phone, snapped a picture, and walked in closer. Oh my God, Jack! You scared me. Meg jumped back, her face frozen in shock. Mind telling me why you're making out with someone in my house? I asked, keeping my voice steady. That's why I wanted you home, Jack, she muttered. I looked at the man next to her and recognized him. Brian Kramer, my newest client's husband. Fury and heartbreak surged, but I held my composure. I need every ounce of patience if I wanted to make this right. So, what exactly did you want to talk about? I asked, forcing my voice to stay calm. Mr. Lawson, may I call you Jack? He asked, way too casually. No, friends call me Jack. You're not a friend. You're the guy sleeping with my wife. Got it? Yes, well, I'm Dr. Brian Kramer, and I've been helping your wife with therapy, he stated as if that explained anything. Oh, so therapy now includes making out in my living room? I asked, raising an eyebrow. It's unconventional, yes, but necessary for her treatment, he claimed, looking completely clueless about the mess he'd created. Dr. Kramer, right? And just how long has this therapy been going on? I asked, still trying to process it all. About 2 months now, he admitted, sounding proud. 2 months? Meg hadn't mentioned seeing a psychologist, let alone inviting him into our lives like this. I turned to her, hoping for an explanation. Meg, why didn't you come to me? I told you years ago, if something was ever wrong, you should talk to me. She faltered, glancing at Brian, who immediately jumped in. Meg, remember our conversations? It's time to show him you're not just some silly woman. His voice took on an almost hypnotic tone, and I watched her whole demeanor shift. Brian is right. I need to stand up for myself, she said, her gaze hardening as she looked at me. Stand up for yourself? When have I ever held you back, Meg? I've always been here for you. I was practically pleading. Jack, I have to do this, she said firmly, the strange, distant look never leaving her eyes. You can watch her leave, but it's happening. I shook my head, both angry and baffled. If you go through with this, Meg, there'll be consequences. Brian didn't seem fazed. Mr. Lawson, I'll need a chair in your bedroom for this therapeutic session, he said, his voice smug, as though he had some claim over my home. You seriously want me to watch this? I asked, disgusted. It's part of the process, he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Oh, and I suppose I'm just supposed to go along with this without a fight? What your wife and I are doing isn't infidelity, it's treatment. After this, your relationship will be better and stronger, he claimed, smiling smugly. I fought the urge to pull my weapon right then and there. Well, I'm not agreeing to this so-called treatment. It is infidelity, no matter how you dress it up, I replied, noting his bare ring finger. This is therapy, Mr. Lawson, albeit controversial. It's not cheating, he said, the arrogance clear in his voice. My love for Meg was all but gone, buried under a wave of numbness and the sense of betrayal. I don't agree, I said firmly, but I followed them upstairs. I kept my phone discreetly recording as Brian laid Meg on our bed, seemingly oblivious to my recording. Last chance, Meg, I said, my voice almost begging. Don't do this. I'm telling you, I won't consent to this. Brian caught a glimpse of my phone, but didn't seem to realize it was recording. You don't have a choice, he sneered, and that was all I needed. I put my phone away and closed in on Brian. Doctor, did my wife happen to mention what I do for a living? I asked, tightening my grip on his shoulder. Brian looked confused, and Meg's face turned pale. I'm a private investigator, I said slowly. Now I've got all the evidence I need. I can file for divorce on grounds of infidelity and sue you for alienation of affection. Brian's smirk vanished as I calmly pulled out my handgun. Colonel Westcolt makes us all equal, I said coolly. Now get dressed and take this woman out of my sight. Meg let out a heavy sigh, her defiance fading as she saw the determination on my face. Get dressed, Meg. Pack your things and get out, I said, each word laced with finality. What? You can't mean that, she stammered. Oh, I mean it. Actions have consequences, and yours start now. Pack your things, Meg. I'm calling my lawyer. I'll file for divorce and get a restraining order on both of you, I said, my voice cracking slightly. Meg looked at me, her face a mixture of shock and confusion. But don't you love me anymore? I took a deep breath. Meg, you broke my heart. I hope it was worth it. If Brian wants nothing to do with you after this, maybe you can move in with your parents. Her expression faltered as she grasped the gravity of what she'd done. And as for me, any love I'd felt had turned to something else entirely. She asked, shocked, not after you let another man, against my wishes, take you in our own bed, I said, my voice rising. You've torn apart our vows, Megan. Everything we had, you've destroyed. I wanted her to feel even a sliver of the pain I was carrying. I can't believe I never truly knew you, I continued, using her full name, something she despised and knew I only used when I was angry. Do you remember our talk before we got married, Megan? About fidelity? You swore you had zero tolerance for cheaters, and I took you at your word that day. Well, this is exactly what you said you'd never accept. Before she could respond, the doctor sneered and took a step toward me, clearly trying to intimidate. I kept my Colt aimed and glanced at Megan, whose face wavered with fear and defiance. You're making a huge mistake, Mr. Lawson, he said with a twisted grin. I'm pressing charges. Big mistake? I don't think so. I caught you in bed with my wife. Thought she was being taken advantage of. So who will the police believe? A respected private investigator or the man trying to claim it was consensual? Look at her face. She's devastated. It's a good thing I got here when I did. Maybe I should call the cops and report it. He blanched, his bravado slipping. No need for that. Let's not blow this out of proportion. He forced a smile, but it was more of a grimace. I noticed he still hadn't even mentioned his wife. Not once. A thought crossed my mind. Maybe he assumed I didn't know about her. I decided to nudge him a little. Imagine the headline. Private investigator's wife caught cheating with her counselor. Story at 11. I shook my head, watching him blush furiously. You can't go public with this, he nearly shouted as he scrambled to dress. Please don't make this public. Maybe I'll consider it, I said, cornering him. But only if you return every cent my soon-to-be ex paid you. And, make no mistake, I'll still sue you for malpractice. Fine, whatever you want. He was practically shaking as he fumbled to get dressed. Anything, just please. But his panic barely moved me. I wanted him to feel the weight of the ruin he'd brought on himself. Guilt didn't enter my mind as he bolted for the door, slamming it behind him. I looked at Meg, and she saw the anger I was barely holding back. Jack, please, she sobbed, her tears hardly believable. We can get through this. Where was baby when I walked in, Megan? Where was love? I asked, a grim smile tugging at my lips. Get dressed, pack up, and leave. You've got 1 hour. I'd suggest heading to your parents' place. Stunned, she stood there a moment before grabbing her things. I let her use the suitcases, knowing I'd buy new ones to replace them. As she packed, I called a locksmith and a furniture store, offering the locksmith a hefty tip for a quick turnaround on changing the locks. At the store, I ordered a new queen-sized bed, sheets, and a comforter, telling them to haul the old bed to the backyard. When they asked why, I replied sharply, I'm not paying you to ask questions. They caught the tone and stayed quiet. Meg finished in about 55 minutes, and I helped by dropping her suitcases by her car. Once she was gone, I stepped back inside and slammed the door, calling Dave, my lawyer, to handle the restraining order against both Meg and Dr. Brian Kramer. I also asked him to prepare divorce papers and file for alienation of affection and malpractice. An hour later, the locksmith and furniture delivery were done, and I paid them by card. Afterward, I canceled Meg's credit and debit cards. Couldn't trust her with a dime of my money anymore. If you think I went too far, then that's your problem. I poured myself a couple of shots of Chivas, needing something with more kick than beer, and downed them slowly. By 7 p.m., the weight of everything felt like it would break me, so I called Ellie. Hola, Jeef, she answered cheerfully. Hey, Ellie, I could use your help tonight. I replied, proud that the Chivas hadn't dulled my mind. What's wrong, boss? She asked, her tone shifting. It's complicated. Just come by my place, and I'll explain, I said, unable to contain my emotions. Be right there, she said, and hung up before I could reply. God bless her. Within 10 minutes, she knocked at my door. I opened it, and she pulled me into a tight hug. After shutting the door behind her, she led me to the couch and sat me down. So, where's Meg? She asked, glancing around and already sensing something serious, given Meg's car was gone. She's gone. Cheated on me, I managed to say, my voice breaking as I finally let the tears fall. Ellie held me, letting me cry on her shoulder, then gently pulled back and looked me in the eyes. Jack, are you absolutely sure Meg was cheating? She asked gently. Unable to answer, I placed my pocket recorder on the table and hit play. Then I handed her my phone, showing her the video. Ellie watched, her expression hardening as the full reality sank in. I got up to grab 2 beers, and when I returned, she stopped the recording and video, anger flashing in her eyes. That woman, she muttered, taking a sip of her beer. I never liked her, Jack. You know that. I managed a small smile, appreciating her fierce loyalty. After a long breath, she asked, What's your plan? I'm in. I suspect the doctor may have messed with her head. Brainwashing or something. If that's true, I want Meg to get help. But as for him, I want him ruined publicly if I can swing it. And his wife was right to be suspicious of him. I replied, my voice rough from the emotional toll. That's garbage, Jack. Pure garbage. Ellie shook her head. So, what's our first move? I felt my old investigative instincts kicking in. Reconnaissance. I'm heading to his office in a few hours to see what I can dig up. If breaking in feels too risky, you don't have to come with me. I added, not wanting to drag her into anything too extreme. Screw that. I'm in, Jeef, she replied without hesitation, gripping my shoulder. I'm not backing down. I looked at her grateful. Thanks, Ellie. I know what you're thinking, and it's tempting, but we've got work to do. I won't stoop to my wife's level. Ellie gave a small nod, holding her feelings in check. Good call, boss. Her loyalty went deeper than I'd realized, and now it was clear she'd always had feelings for me. Part of me wanted the same, but I refused to let this betrayal lower my own standards. I wasn't going to hurt Ellie, not when there was even a chance Meg had been manipulated. And so we got up, ready to head to the office and retrieve the van. Meg's betrayal had lit a fire in me, and with Ellie by my side, I knew I'd see this through. Ellie would be crushed if, after all this, I reconciled with Meg. We left in her car to pick up the van from the office, where I slapped some Comcast magnets onto it for a bit of urban camouflage. They blended in nicely, helping us keep a low profile. We reached Dr. Brian Kramer's office around 11 p.m. I picked the lock, wearing thin gloves that left no prints but kept my grip steady. Once inside, I adjusted my headphones, checking the line to Ellie. Reading you loud and clear, Jeef, Ellie's voice came through. I had a 50 gigabytes USB drive ready to go, planning to search both his computer and file cabinets. If he could pull this with my wife, how many others had he victimized? I called the security company, impersonating Dr. Kramer, and claimed I'd forgotten the system password. They believed me with almost no verification. Amateurs. Ellie chuckled softly in my ear. I know, right? I grinned as I eased the lock on the office door. His computer blinked awake, revealing no family photos on the desk. No evidence of any real commitment to his wife. A man with a beautiful woman at home. Yet here he was, preying on patience. The computer was password protected, of course. I paused, considering what I knew about him. Clever with women, but not the sharpest outside his element. Ellie had dug up dirt on him, too. Claims of malpractice and harassment, all mysteriously withdrawn. I tried Romeo. Access denied. Casanova. Denied. Lothario. Access granted. Predictable idiot. Once inside, I found what I needed, including files on Meg. I downloaded the special patient section, nearly maxing out the USB with 50 gigabytes of files. He even had videos of his sessions with Meg. Removing the drive, I put his computer to sleep and checked his file cabinet. Meg's file was there, but it was clean. No surprise he didn't document his offenses on paper. Find anything, Jeef? Ellie asked through the earpiece. Plenty. No paperwork, but I've got around 45 gigs of patient videos. Damn. We'll go through them when we get home, she replied, her tone shifting on the words we and home, making me wonder. I left the office, making sure everything was secured with no trace of our presence. No security cameras, just one untraceable phone call. It was well past 1 a.m. when we returned to my house, and after closing the garage door, Ellie looked at me seriously. I'm staying with you tonight, Jack, she said firmly. I shrugged, trying to play it off. Sure, the guest room's yours. No, I mean in your room, on the new bed. You don't have to be alone tonight. She spoke gently but decisively, revealing the quiet closeness we'd both been feeling. Ellie, you're the only woman I trust right now. Please don't make me break my marriage vows tonight, I said, my voice edged with raw honesty. She nodded, smiling softly as she kissed my cheek. I promise. We'll go over the footage in the morning. I brought my laptop so that we can split the work. Good plan, I replied, heading for the shower. Under the water, everything hit me at once. The betrayal, the anger, the sense of utter loss. Suddenly, the shower door cracked open, and there was Ellie, leading me to bed and tucking me in, then slipping in beside me. Numb, I drifted off, emotionally spent. When I woke up, Ellie was hugging me tightly. I knew I needed to address the unspoken feelings between us. Ellie, listen, I started as she looked at me intently. Yesterday feels like a bad dream, but I have to say this. I'd be lying if I said I haven't thought about you in that way sometimes. But I love my wife, or at least who I thought she was. If Megan did this willingly, there's no saving us. If I do divorce her, and you still want whatever this could be between us, I'd be willing to try. She sighed, her voice filled with a mix of admiration and regret. That's one of the reasons I fell in love with you, Jack. You're the most honest man I've ever known. Thanks, sweetheart. I kissed her forehead, then got up to get dressed. By the time I was ready, she was already in the kitchen, and I heard the sizzle of a frying pan. She was making breakfast. Smiling, I pulled on my jeans, slipped on a t-shirt, holstered my Colt, and went to join her. I didn't usually carry a weapon at home, but with a sociopath like Dr. Kramer lurking around, I wasn't taking chances. Ellie had her 9mm Smith & Daveson on the counter, another reminder that she took our line of work seriously. She got her concealed carry permit right after I hired her. Smells great, I said, feeling the warmth of my first genuine smile since this mess started. Thanks, Jack, she replied, flipping an omelet filled with bacon, cheese, and salsa, wearing one of my old t-shirts and her jeans from last night. As I sat down, I thought of everything we'd been through. Ellie, I know this might be tough for both of us. I'm still piecing things together. She raised an eyebrow. Boss, don't patronize me. You knew what you were signing up for when you hired me. With my background, I was ready for the ugly side of life. I fell in love with you, yeah, but that doesn't mean I'm going to shy away from this case. Meg was a friend to me too, and that doctor is in for a rude awakening. Ellie had been an LAPD detective for 2 years before being dismissed over a rough handling incident. She avoided serious charges because the suspect was guilty, and the department didn't want the PR disaster. During her interview, she told me everything. Her honesty was one of the reasons I hired her. She was someone I could trust to get her hands dirty. You're right, I said, nodding. There's something I need to tell you that even Meg doesn't know. Ellie looked intrigued, setting our plates on the counter and grabbing coffee. What do you mean? I never worked for an insurance company, I admitted, taking a deep breath. I work covertly for my own company. The name's Jack Lawson, but I used to be a spy. And no, this isn't an episode of Burn Notice, I said, giving a slight chuckle. Ellie smirked, shrugging. I kind of figured, either that or a criminal record. You're always looking around like someone's watching. You know your stuff when it comes to bugs, tapping phones, and picking locks. You're one of the best, I said, chuckling as I sipped my coffee. Ellie was an incredible investigator, that was clear. You're good, I said, savoring the warmth of the coffee. And you make the best coffee on earth, by the way. She laughed, giving me a playful wink. Thanks, boss. Just so you know, I'm not just a pretty face and a hot body. I laughed. If you were, I wouldn't have hired you. I shrugged as she leaned in and kissed my cheek, which made me pause. Thanks, Jack. Whatever happens, thank you for everything. She hesitated and then grinned. But hey, don't think I'm leaving. I'm working with you until we're old and gray. Good, because I can't afford to lose you, even if I could offer $1 million a day. Good thing I'm priceless then, she smirked. Now eat up, boss, before I have to spank you. She stuck her tongue out, and I did the same, digging into her omelet. I couldn't deny her cooking was surprisingly delicious. There's a saying that a way to a man's heart is through his stomach, or, in some cases, through his desires. Meg had her strengths, no doubt about it. In the kitchen, she could hold her own, and she definitely knew how to turn up the heat in the bedroom. But Ellie's cooking put Meg's to shame. And while it might sound cold, the thought crossed my mind. If Meg was as good at taking care of me as Ellie was, maybe I'd be considering a different future. But Meg hadn't even considered talking to me before seeking out Dr. Kramer, trusting that sleaze over her own husband. That wasn't the woman I married. She used to be open with me, telling me everything, until she started that so-called therapy. Once breakfast was over, I helped Ellie with the dishes. When we finished, she surprised me, turning around to wrap her arms around my neck and leaning her face close to mine. I'm sorry, Jack, she said quietly. I looked at her and shook my head. No, Ellie, I don't think either of us are sorry about that. I chuckled. Damn, I wish I'd met you before Meg did. Me too, she replied softly. It hit me then, someone was bound to get hurt, and I didn't want it to be either of them. But if Meg had been truly coerced or manipulated by that con artist doctor, we needed to see those videos before making any decisions. Let's go watch the videos, I said. Maybe they'll show us what kind of influence that guy had on Meg. We went to my home office, and I split the video files with her on her laptop. I started with the first recording of Meg's sessions. The initial interview was standard, an introduction where Dr. Kramer scribbled notes while asking questions about her family, her life, her husband, me. Meg spoke about how much she loved her family. Kramer had a faint, smug smile as he listened, and just before the session ended, he told her not to mention these conversations to anyone. Said it would be better for the process. That was enough to make my stomach turn. From the start, he'd set her up to keep me in the dark. In the second session, the questions got more personal, with Kramer jotting down every answer in that damn notebook. He pushed her with some pretty intimate questions, and although she hesitated, he assured her that no one would ever know. She answered honestly, and at the end, he reminded her to keep the sessions confidential, which she agreed to without questioning. I checked the timestamps on the files. There were 16 videos of Meg's Monday and Wednesday sessions over the last 2 months. In the third video, it was clear he was starting to edge past any ethical boundaries, though nothing could be called brainwashing. By the fourth video, his intentions came out in the open. He asked her to describe fantasies, something no ethical counselor would do. She was hesitant, but he insisted it was therapeutic, and eventually, she shared a couple. Each session was more of the same. Each time, he'd remind her to keep it confidential, slowly building a bond with her trust. By the 14th video, he'd raised her self-esteem but twisted it, pushing her toward this idea of self-indulgence. He managed to convince her that having 2 men, including me, would somehow be therapeutic. And this time, he didn't need to tell her to keep quiet. He knew she wouldn't breathe a word, not even to me. By the 15th session, less than 2 weeks ago, he offered himself as her second partner, nudging her as she struggled with the idea until, finally, she caved. The 16th clip was a follow-up where she told him she'd contact him when she was ready. I stopped the video, numb with shock. When I looked up, I saw Ellie, tears in her eyes, her face mirroring my own disgust. "This guy's a predator," I said quietly. "A real Lothario, right down to his password." Ellie nodded, anger flashing in her eyes. "And I'm right there with you, boss. He deserves to pay for this. I'm going to hit him so hard with a lawsuit he'll wish he'd never been born," I vowed, feeling the conviction deep in my bones. Ellie nodded, placing a hand on my shoulder. "I'm in," she said firmly. Most of these videos were short. Meg's sessions were definitely his longest. "Figures," I muttered. "And this guy? He makes Machiavelli look like a saint." But as twisted as his behavior was, I couldn't see any blatant coercion or hypnosis. He was sly, careful, manipulating rather than brainwashing. "Yeah, I saw that too," Ellie agreed. "Looks like he's never involved a husband directly in these therapies before. But sooner or later, they all end up getting found out, and the husbands leave." It was clear that Kramer's technique was no accident. He was out to exploit vulnerable women, abusing their trust for his own benefit. And Meg, she'd been one of his casualties. There was no denying it. He would answer for every last bit of this. Every case I reviewed had ended in divorce. Ellie quickly jotted down the names of the women and their ex-husbands. "All right, contact a few of those exes," I told her, "and find out how they discovered Dr. Numbskull was seducing their wives. Meanwhile, I need to reach Laura." After escorting Ellie out of the room, I pulled out my phone and dialed Laura's number. "Hello, Laura, it's Jack," I said, my voice tight with tension. "Oh, Jack, thanks for calling. Are you going to start the investigation today?" she asked, her tone hopeful. "Actually, it's already finished. You were even more right than you thought. Would you be able to come over to my place today or tomorrow? We need to discuss some things, both personal and professional. Just to be clear, I'm not hitting on you," I added with a sigh. "But this is a matter close to my heart." "Of course, Jack. Would you like to talk more about it now?" she offered. "No, not over the phone. Tonight or tomorrow morning would be best. My assistant, Ellie, will join us. She has information to share, too." She agreed, and I gave her my address. True to her word, she arrived in just over 10 minutes, pulling up in a stunning Jaguar XJ6. As I opened the door for her, Ellie brought out fresh coffee. I grabbed our laptops and settled on the couch, with Ellie and me on either side of Laura. Laura, I began, Brian is a serial predator. He abuses his professional status to manipulate and seduce women, betraying their husbands in secret. Ellie added, he targets married women exclusively. No single women in any of these videos. It's all about control. He uses their trust, leads conversations about fantasies or issues in their marriage, and then uses that to seduce them. He doesn't brainwash them exactly, but he's a master manipulator. As we played the series of videos for her, Laura's face turned beet red with fury. How in the world did he keep this a secret? She shouted, overwhelmed by the sheer number of cases. Laura, there's more, I said, swallowing hard. She looked at me with shock. More? I took a deep breath. This case is close to my heart because my wife, Megan, was his latest victim. I showed her Megan's name in the highlighted files. Oh my God, Jack, I'm so sorry. Laura reached out and hugged me, her grip fierce. He's going to pay for this, I swear. Laura, I said, how much is Brian worth monetarily? I'll be suing him for alienation of affection and gross negligence. She smirked. Brian is worth over $250 million, including his properties worldwide. His practice is lucrative, and his books are bestsellers. He's even been on Dr. Phil several times. All right, I said, here's the plan. We hit him hard and fast, but it'll take a few days to prepare everything. Do you trust us? I asked, glancing between Ellie and myself. Absolutely, she said. You've suffered through this as well, Jack. I'm so sorry. I didn't see what a snake he was sooner. It's all right. Meet me at my office tomorrow morning, and I'll introduce you to Dave, my attorney. He'll be handling my divorce from Megan, along with my lawsuits against Brian. By Friday, we'll bring in other ex-husbands and build a strong case for malpractice and alienation of affection. As I laid out the plan, Laura nodded, a small smile breaking through her anger. I can do that. The hard part will be acting normal around him for the next 2 days. You could say you're visiting your mother, I suggested. He's trained to pick up on behavioral changes, so this excuse could buy us time. Laura nodded. Good idea. I'll call her and ask her to cover for me. I've got a guest room with a double bed here and room for 2 more cars in the garage, I added. She accepted the offer gratefully, and I handed her a garage remote. She went home to pack, while Ellie went to gather her things for the week. Half an hour later, Ellie was back, hauling her bags straight into my room and filling up Meg's old dresser. I couldn't help but smile at her determination. The next morning, Laura returned just as I was getting out of bed. I met her in the garage, and she hugged me, her eyes filled with sympathy. She'd packed light, with just a small suitcase and a few essentials. But what really caught my attention were the financial records she held. These are Ellie's? I asked, as she handed me account statements that revealed Brian's considerable liquid assets. I barely held back a gasp. We'd be going to war with some serious ammunition. Ellie joined us soon after, and we gathered at the coffee table, laptops ready, each of us committed to holding Dr. Brian Kramer accountable for every deception and betrayal he'd orchestrated. Ellie made breakfast, and after another satisfying meal, Laura expressed that she was ready to move forward. I told her we'd proceed once all the ex-husbands and their ex-wives had been updated on the latest developments. Our plan was simple. We'd contact each of the 11 ex-husbands and encourage them to inform their ex-wives of what was unfolding. Together, we'd file separate lawsuits against Dr. Brickwall for negligence and alienation of affection. Most of the husbands were eager for a shot at revenge on Brian Flakehart, and their ex-wives, equally betrayed, were ready to stand with us. I wasn't bringing Meg into this, though, not after seeing that last video. At Dave's office, 9 of the 11 ex-husbands we'd contacted showed up with their ex-wives. As ex-husband number 12, I was part of the group. To speed things along, Dave drew up identical paperwork for each client's malpractice and alienation of affection claims, only swapping out names as needed. He was practically gleeful, fully aware of the financial fallout this was going to cause. We estimated that Brian would have to part with over $175 million in liquid assets and potentially sell another $100 million worth of real estate worldwide to cover the malpractice, divorce, and of lawsuits. We'd opted for individual suits rather than a class action to maximize impact. We wanted Brian to feel his life crumble around him like the walls of Jericho. With Ellie, Laura, and me waiting at the end of the line, Dave guided each client through their paperwork. Each had the same objective: to hold Brian accountable for wrecking lives. Dave was a good friend, but still a lawyer, and he was delighted by the scale of the case. By the time he finished, he promised our new group of clients that the papers would be delivered to Brian's office on Monday morning with plenty of witnesses. Finally, it was Laura and my turn. I filed for divorce from Meg, while Laura filed for divorce from her soon-to-be cash-strapped husband. Dave, I noticed, seemed immediately taken with Laura, and from her smile, the interest was mutual. We agreed that all documents would be delivered by separate process servers at the same time to maximize the impact. Ellie, Laura, and I couldn't help but exchange grins. It would be a packed Monday morning, and we'd all be sitting in the front row to watch. As a final touch, Dave issued each of his clients a restraining order against Brian, knowing the enormous financial windfall this whole ordeal would bring him once the dust settled. With the initial steps complete, we moved to Phase 2, making this public. Using video clips from Meg's sessions, I removed identifying details, including her face and voice, replacing them with a computer-generated narration. With a new media editing program, I pieced together clips showing Brian's pattern of behavior, how he manipulated women, using his influence to destroy marriages for his own gain. I also included clips from other patients, illustrating how he encouraged them to manipulate their husbands under the guise of therapy. The media would be drawn to this story like moths to a flame, and we anticipated the FBI and the California Board of Psychologists would take immediate interest. To protect myself, I created a dummy email account, routing it through proxy servers. Phase 2 would kick off Monday morning, just as the process servers finished delivering their papers. At the appointed time, we waited in the parking lot across from Brian's office. As the last process server left, I handed Laura a bucket of popcorn. She was munching on it when Dr. Kramer came rushing out, looking frantic. He spotted me, standing alongside his soon-to-be ex-wife and Ellie. Calmly, I pulled out my phone, hit the bulk send button, and set Phase 2 into motion. Then we got in my car and drove off, leaving Brian to scream incoherently that he'd get us all. The last image I had of him that day was of him kneeling in the parking lot, clutching papers, tears streaming down his face. But my revenge was far from over. Phase 3 involved confronting Meg. We met at a public Starbucks, where she sat down across from me, a glimmer of hope in her eyes. "I'm here. Does this mean you want to talk?" she asked hesitantly. "Actually, I have something to tell you," I replied, a calm smile on my face. "Meg, I could have forgiven you if you'd been coerced or brainwashed. But after seeing hours of you agreeing to everything he said, you ultimately suggested that I become a betrayed man. That's unforgivable." Her face paled as I shook my head. "Meg, I loved you more than you can imagine." I paused, taking in her expression. "Loved? Past tense." This betrayal ended everything. I handed her the divorce papers. "You'll find them fair." Her hands shook as she took the papers, shock settling into her features. "You can't be serious, Jack. I wasn't myself. You have to believe me," she pleaded, panic edging her voice. "If I were you, Meg, I'd start thinking about what you're going to tell your parents," I said coolly. Her eyes searched mine, but she knew the conversation was over. "They receive an anonymous letter about you," I said, leaving Meg in stunned silence. Dave asked Laura out, and she accepted, trusting my vouch for his honesty. The next day, Dave called to say Meg and her lawyer wanted to talk. I brought Ellie along for support. "Mr. Lawson, I'm Lynn Watson, representing your wife pro bono. She says the terms are unacceptable," her lawyer declared. "Miss Watson," I replied, leaning back, "I have plenty of evidence. My soon-to-be ex conspired to betray me with her lover, so my offer is more than generous." Dave pulled out a DVD of Megan and Dr. Kramer's last sessions, along with voice recordings and photos. Lynn, defeated, consulted Meg, then agreed to the terms. Over the next 30 days, Ellie and I grew closer. We kissed, but didn't go further, my stubbornness keeping me from moving on completely. Finally, the trial arrived, and as the judge closed the case, I kissed Ellie, knowing we could finally be together. Meg approached us afterward, apologizing for her mistakes. Ellie promised to take care of me, the love clear in her eyes. During that waiting period, Ellie moved in, and on the day we returned from court, I took off my old wedding ring and embraced our new beginning together. Over 2.5 years, our collective lawsuits devastated Brian. Several couples, separated by his manipulations, reconciled after receiving settlements. Meg, now estranged from her parents, relocated to Vegas, working as a dominatrix, a path reflecting Kramer's influence on her psyche. Laura secured a large settlement, taking more than half of Brian's assets. Criminal charges struck Brian hard. He lost his license, filed for bankruptcy, and endured a brutal attack before his trial. Eventually, he was convicted, but he lasted only 2 days in prison before ending his own life. Laura used her inheritance to help those Brian had wronged, bringing some measure of justice. Dave and Laura married, with me and Ellie as best man and maid of honor. The lawsuits rewarded Ellie and me handsomely, netting us $15 million. Now retired, we're raising 2 children, our son Luke and our sweet daughter Emma. Looking back, that case was a mixed bag, but in the end, life worked out better than I could have hoped.